I never thought it would come to this, Christa Pike murmured during her trial, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. But the reality was undeniable. It had. On January 12, 1995, a life was stolen in a brutal, unimaginable way, leaving a trail of shock and confusion that would echo for years. What could possibly drive a young woman to commit such an unspeakable act? And why did it have to end this way? This case has haunted Tennessee for decades, shaking the foundations of what we believe is possible. Christa Pike, once a troubled teenager with a future ahead of her, became the face of one of the most chilling murders in the state's history. The victim, Colleen Slemmer, was just 19, bright, hopeful, and starting fresh at a local vocational school. But that night, everything changed. This isn't just a story of a brutal murder. It's a story of jealousy, manipulation, and the disturbing reality of what can happen when the wrong people come together. But how did it happen? And why was Christa Pike the one to face the consequences, while others walked away with lesser sentences? Colleen Slemmer was just 19 years old when her life was violently taken away from her. Born and raised in a small town, Colleen had a simple but clear vision for her future. She was determined to build something meaningful, and like many young adults, she sought an opportunity for a fresh start. That's why she enrolled in the Job Corps program in Knoxville, Tennessee, a chance to learn new skills and eventually find stable work that could help her overcome the challenges she'd faced. Her family, while not always in the public eye, supported her decision. They believed in her potential and saw in Colleen a bright, driven young woman with everything to look forward to. She had been raised in a loving, albeit imperfect home where the value of hard work was always instilled in her. Her parents, who were often preoccupied with their own struggles, were nonetheless proud of her efforts to better her life. Colleen had recently enrolled in a vocational program, hopeful that it would lead to a successful future. Colleen was kind, compassionate, and eager to make friends. Her relationships at the Job Corps Center spoke to her desire for connection and stability. But at the same time, she was navigating a new, more complex social world where peer dynamics and rivalries were at play. Though she didn't have a lot of family in Knoxville, she had formed close bonds with a few individuals in the program who would later be intertwined with her tragic end. She had plans that would never come to fruition. In the weeks leading up to her death, Colleen had spoken of her desire to stay on track, finish her training, and eventually return home with a new sense of purpose. But all of those dreams were cut short that cold winter night. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Christa Pike's behavior became more erratic, and tensions between her and Colleen Slemmer grew. Christa had become fixated on the idea that Colleen was trying to steal her boyfriend, Tatterell Shipp. Though Colleen's friends later denied this claim, in Christa's mind, the rivalry was very real, and it consumed her thoughts. What started as jealousy soon escalated into something far more dangerous. Christa's obsession with Colleen only deepened as time went on. She began confiding in her friends about her feelings, telling them that Colleen was a threat to her relationship with Tatterell. Her paranoia grew, and Christa talked openly about wanting to hurt Colleen, an act that she later claimed was meant to scare her. No one took her seriously at the time. To those around her, it seemed like typical teenage drama, a girl upset over a boy. But for Christa, it was much more than that. It was a spark that would soon ignite a tragic chain of events. By January 12, 1990, Christa had a plan. She enlisted the help of her boyfriend, Tatterell, and another acquaintance, Shadola Peterson. Together, they decided to lure Colleen into a secluded area, promising a peaceful resolution to their differences. They signed out from the Job Corps dormitory, heading toward an abandoned steam plant near the University of Tennessee campus. What was supposed to be a reconciliation quickly turned into a nightmare. The group arrived at the isolated location, and for a brief moment, Colleen likely thought everything was fine. Christa acted friendly, reassuring Colleen that they were there to make peace. But the moment they reached the secluded spot, Christa and Tatterell turned on Colleen, launching into a violent attack. Shadola, acting as the lookout, watched as Christa and Tatterell beat Colleen, slashed her with a box cutter, and eventually delivered a fatal blow with a chunk of asphalt. Christa didn't stop there. She took a piece of Colleen's skull as a trophy and showed it off to others in the days that followed. The brutality of the attack shocked everyone who later learned the details. But what made it even more disturbing was the fact that it wasn't a spontaneous act. Christa had meticulously planned it, feeding off her jealousy and paranoia, and the murder was the culmination of weeks of growing anger. Christa Pike was just 18 years old when she committed one of the most chilling murders in Tennessee's history. Her upbringing was marked by turmoil and instability. Born into a broken home, she faced neglect and abuse from a young age. Her parents' volatile relationship created an environment of constant upheaval. She was a victim of both emotional and physical trauma, and her struggles with mental health were evident throughout her childhood. By the time she reached her teenage years, Christa was a deeply troubled individual. She had a history of defiance, engaging in destructive behavior, and frequently clashing with authority figures. Her sense of isolation only deepened as she bounced between foster homes and unstable living situations. Despite her difficult upbringing, Christa found herself enrolled in the Job Corps program in Knoxville, Tennessee, hoping for a fresh start. However, she quickly fell into a toxic relationship with Tatterell Shipp, another participant in the program. Tatterell, though not as much of a focal point in the case, played a key role in Christa's descent into violence. He was a year younger than Christa and had his own troubled past. Together, they formed a dangerous bond, one that was built on both their shared isolation and the emotional volatility of their relationship. As Christa's jealousy over Colleen's perceived threat to their relationship grew, Tatterell became complicit in the crime. His role in the attack was crucial, as he joined Christa in the brutal assault on Colleen. Shadala Peterson, a third participant in the crime, acted as the lookout during the murder. Shadala's involvement was less direct than that of Christa and Tatterell, but she was still an active participant in the events that led to Colleen's death. After the crime, Shadala cooperated with authorities, providing testimony that helped secure Christa and Tatterell's convictions. Unlike the other two, Shadala faced a much lighter sentence. She received probation for her role in the crime. Christa Pike's actions were driven by an intense combination of jealousy, manipulation, and a need for control. She was the primary instigator in the attack on Colleen, and her ruthless behavior was a reflection of the psychological toll her troubled upbringing had on her. Despite her youth, Christa's calculated actions demonstrated a disturbing lack of empathy and a cold willingness to resort to violence to resolve perceived threats. The discovery of Colleen Slemmer's body on the morning of January 13, 1990, marked the beginning of an intense investigation that would unfold rapidly, though not without its challenges. A groundskeeper, carrying out his daily routine near the abandoned steam plant, stumbled upon the gruesome scene. Initially, he thought he had found the remains of an animal, so badly mutilated was the body. But as he approached, the horror became clear. It was a human body. The young woman lying there, her body ravaged beyond recognition, was Colleen Slemmer. The police were quickly called to the scene, and what they found sent shockwaves through the Knoxville community. The brutality of the attack was beyond what anyone could have imagined. Colleen's body was covered in cuts, bruises, and deep wounds, with a pentagram carved into her chest. Her skull had been crushed, and a piece of it was missing. Whoever had done this had shown no mercy, and the violence was chilling in its savagery. Investigators immediately turned to the sign-out logs at the Job Corps Center. They discovered that 4 students had signed out together the previous evening: Christa Pike, her boyfriend Tatterell Shipp, their friend Shadala Peterson, and Colleen. However, only 3 of them returned. This was the first clue that led authorities to the trio of suspects. Within hours, the police had brought in Christa, Tatterell, and Shadala for questioning. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Christa was the one who had orchestrated the entire crime. She had lured Colleen to the isolated location under the false pretense of making peace. But once there, the situation turned violent. The police quickly found evidence that would seal Christa's fate. Inside her jacket, they discovered a piece of Colleen's skull, a grisly trophy that Christa had taken from the scene. The police also uncovered shocking testimony from other students at the Job Corps Center. Christa had been bragging about the murder, showing off the piece of skull to her friends and describing the gruesome details of the crime. Her cold and nonchalant attitude towards what had happened only deepened the horror of the case. The events leading up to Colleen Slemmer's murder on the evening of January 12, 1990, were far from random. Christa Pike, driven by jealousy and paranoia, had carefully crafted a plan, one that relied on deception and manipulation. She knew that Colleen was vulnerable, just a teenager looking to make new friends and start over, and she would exploit that vulnerability. Krista's feelings of insecurity and jealousy toward Colleen had been building for weeks. She became fixated on the idea that Colleen was a threat to her relationship with Tadderil Ship, her 17-year-old boyfriend. Christa had been growing increasingly paranoid, convinced that Colleen was trying to steal him away. It was a thought that consumed her, twisting into something much darker than simple teenage rivalry. To Christa, there was no other option but to eliminate the perceived threat. On the evening of the murder, Christa put her plan into motion. She reached out to Colleen, pretending that she wanted to make amends and end their conflict. Christa even promised Colleen a chance to talk things out and offered marijuana as a gesture of peace. Colleen, naive and unaware of Christa's growing rage, agreed to meet. At around 9:00 p.m., Colleen signed out of the Job Corps dormitory alongside Christa, Tadderil, and Shadala Peterson. The group left together, walking in the cold evening air toward an abandoned steam plant near the University of Tennessee campus, a location that, on the surface, seemed harmless enough. But the isolated nature of the spot made it the perfect place for Christa's twisted plan to unfold. As they walked together toward the steam plant, Colleen was likely unaware of the danger that lurked ahead. Christa, ever the manipulator, played her role perfectly, acting friendly and reassuring Colleen that everything was fine. They talked as they walked, the tension hidden behind Christa's calm exterior. To Colleen, this meeting was just a chance to end the petty rivalry between them and move on. But Christa's mind had already been made up. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about revenge. Upon reaching the secluded spot, Colleen likely felt a momentary relief. She had no reason to suspect that things were about to take a violent turn. Christa, however, was no longer pretending. The mask of friendship slipped away, revealing the fury that had been building inside her. Once Christa and Tadderil launched their attack, Colleen had no chance. The secluded location, far from any witnesses or help, became the scene of unimaginable horror. Christa and Tadderil wasted no time in turning on Colleen, their violence swift and unrelenting. Christa, driven by an overwhelming need to dominate and control, began by taunting Colleen, accusing her of trying to steal Tadderil from her. Colleen, bewildered and frightened, denied the accusations, pleading with Christa to listen. But Christa wasn't interested in hearing anything. The jealousy that had been consuming her for weeks had finally boiled over, and now there was only one thing on her mind: punishment. The attack escalated quickly. Christa and Tadderil began beating Colleen mercilessly. Fists pounded into her body and brutal kicks followed, each blow making it harder for Colleen to defend herself. Struggling, Colleen cried out for help, begging them to stop, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. In her desperation, Colleen tried to protect herself, but she was outnumbered, and her attackers were relentless. At some point during the assault, Christa pulled out a box cutter and began slashing at Colleen's face and body. The wounds were deep and severe, blood pouring from her as the violence continued. But Christa wasn't finished. With each strike, the attack became more horrific. Christa then found a meat cleaver, further escalating the brutality. She continued to mutilate Colleen's body, carving a pentagram into her chest, an unsettling act that spoke to Christa's growing obsession with the occult. Some reports suggest that Christa also carved the symbol into Colleen's forehead. The physical and emotional pain Colleen endured that night was unimaginable. She was still alive as Christa and Tadderil pressed on, showing no mercy. Colleen's body bore the marks of the savage attack, and her cries grew weaker with each passing moment. She begged for her life, but the cruelty of her assailants had no limits. Finally, Christa found a large chunk of asphalt, and with one final blow, she brought it crashing down onto Colleen's skull. The impact was devastating. Colleen's skull cracked open, and she died instantly from the blunt force trauma. But even after Colleen's death, the violence didn't end. Christa, still in a state of twisted triumph, took a piece of Colleen's skull as a macabre souvenir. The attack had lasted for more than 30 minutes, but for Colleen it was the end. The brutality, the viciousness, and the sheer cruelty of the crime left a mark on all who would later hear the details. For Christa and Tadderil, the act of murder was not enough. They needed to dehumanize Colleen further, to show off their trophy and boast about what they had done. When the attack was over, Christa and Tatterall left the scene, walking back toward the Job Corps dormitory as if nothing had happened. Shadala Peterson, the lookout, was also complicit in the crime, though her role was more passive. She watched from a distance, a silent witness to the horrific act. Christa, unfazed by what had transpired, acted as if the night had been nothing more than a casual outing. The next morning, she went about her day as if it were normal. She sat down to breakfast in the same dormitory dining hall where Colleen had sat just hours earlier, her body still lying cold in the woods. Christa even pulled out the piece of Colleen's skull and showed it to others at her table, bragging about what she had done. She described the murder in graphic detail, as if it were nothing more than an accomplishment to be proud of. The morning after the brutal murder, the discovery of Colleen Slemmer's body marked the beginning of a fast-paced investigation that would reveal chilling details and the involvement of those closest to the victim. The scene was discovered by a groundskeeper who, at first, mistook Colleen's severely disfigured body for an animal carcass. As he approached, the horror of what he had found became clear. Colleen's body lay there, brutally attacked and mutilated beyond recognition. The body showed signs of extreme torture, with a pentagram carved into her chest and the skull smashed in a way that left investigators speechless. Immediately, the authorities were notified, and within hours, the Knoxville Police Department was on the scene, piecing together the horrific details. While it was clear the crime was not just a random act of violence, the investigators didn't yet know who had committed it. They began by gathering evidence at the crime scene, searching for clues that might point them in the right direction. The brutality of the crime itself left little doubt about the intensity of the killer's emotions. This was a personal act. Their first breakthrough came when they looked into the Job Corps sign-out logs. The records indicated that 4 people, Christa Pike, Tatterall Shipp, Shadala Peterson, and Colleen Slemmer, had signed out together the night before. However, when investigators dug deeper, they realized that only 3 people returned. The fact that Colleen did not come back with the others immediately raised suspicions. Who was missing? The police traced the names on the sign-out sheet, and soon they had their first leads. Within a matter of hours, Christa, Tatterall, and Shadala were brought in for questioning. Each of them was asked about their whereabouts the previous night, and each had a different story to tell. Shadala Peterson, the lookout, initially downplayed her role, claiming she was just there to watch. But as the interrogation progressed, it became evident that Shadala's involvement wasn't as passive as she had tried to make it seem. However, it was Christa who was at the center of the investigation. The details that came to light as the police spoke with Christa were nothing short of chilling. Christa was acting suspiciously calm, and her responses were disturbingly nonchalant. She denied being involved at first, but when the police pressed her, they soon found a significant clue: a piece of Colleen's skull. Christa was carrying it in her jacket pocket. It was one of the most shocking discoveries of the case, as it solidified what the authorities had feared. Christa Pike, the 18-year-old girl they were questioning, had been directly involved in the murder. The situation took another dark turn when investigators began talking to other students at the Job Corps Center. Christa had been bragging about the murder, showing off the piece of Colleen's skull to her friends, and describing the gruesome details of the crime with a disturbing level of pride. She openly confessed to having committed the crime, but her attitude was cold and detached, almost as if she was boasting about a trophy rather than admitting to the murder of an innocent young woman. By the end of the day, Christa, Tatterall, and Shadala were all arrested. But while Tatterall and Shadala's roles in the crime were still being assessed, it was Christa's involvement that seemed most clear. The evidence was overwhelming. The police had the skull fragment, and they had Christa's own chilling confession. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated, carried out by someone who had carefully plotted her actions and had no remorse for what she had done. The investigation continued, and the deeper the police dug, the more disturbing details came to light about Christa's past. They uncovered a history of troubled relationships, mental health struggles, and a profound sense of isolation. It became clear that Christa had been struggling for years with unresolved trauma, and that her violent outburst on the night of Colleen's death was the culmination of months of internal conflict. While the authorities didn't excuse her actions, they began to understand that her troubled past had contributed to her increasingly erratic behavior. For Colleen's family, the investigation was the beginning of a painful process. Every new detail that emerged made it harder for them to understand how someone could have done this to their daughter. Colleen had been a young woman with a future ahead of her, and now she was gone. The emotional toll on her family was immense, and the community of Knoxville was shaken by the brutality of the crime. Christa Pike's trial began in early 1996, and the prosecution had a strong case. The evidence against Christa was overwhelming. Not only had she confessed to the crime, but they also had physical evidence linking her to the murder. The most damning piece of evidence was the fragment of Colleen Slemmer's skull that Christa had carried around as a grisly trophy. Christa's bragging about the murder to fellow Job Corps students only added to the prosecution's case, painting a picture of a cold and calculating killer who showed no remorse for her actions. The prosecution focused heavily on the brutality of the crime and Christa's leadership role in the attack. They argued that it wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment act of violence. It was premeditated and fueled by Christa's jealousy and obsessive need to control her boyfriend, Tadarill Shep. The prosecution emphasized that Christa had planned the murder, luring Colleen to the abandoned steam plant under false pretenses, and that she had delivered the fatal blow. During the trial, witnesses testified about Christa's behavior before and after the murder. Fellow students at the Job Corps Center described how she had been openly bragging about the crime, showing off the piece of Colleen's skull, and talking in graphic detail about the murder. Her nonchalant attitude shocked many, especially when contrasted with the horror of the crime she had committed. Christa's complete lack of remorse was a key point for the prosecution, who argued that it demonstrated her depravity and the danger she posed to society. Christa's defense team, however, tried to argue that her troubled childhood and mental health struggles should be taken into account when determining her culpability. They presented evidence of Christa's difficult upbringing, including her history of abuse, her time in foster care, and her struggles with mental health issues. Two experts testified that Christa had experienced significant trauma during her childhood, which may have contributed to her violent outburst. The defense argued that Christa was not entirely responsible for her actions and that her mental state at the time of the crime should be considered as a mitigating factor. But despite these arguments, the jury was unconvinced. They deliberated for just a few hours before returning a guilty verdict on both counts: first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Christa Pike was sentenced to death by electrocution for the murder of Colleen Slemmer, and she was also sentenced to 25 years in prison for the conspiracy charge. The disparity in the sentences given to Christa Pike and her co-defendants raised eyebrows. Tadarill Shep, who had been just 17 at the time of the murder, was tried as an adult. While the prosecution sought life in prison without the possibility of parole, the jury could not unanimously agree on his sentence. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving a 25-year consecutive sentence for the conspiracy charge. Shadala Peterson, the lookout, had the least severe sentence of all. She made a deal with the prosecution and agreed to testify against Christa and Tadarill in exchange for a lighter sentence. Shadala was ultimately sentenced to probation, a decision that sparked controversy due to the severity of the crime and her involvement in it. Christa Pike's sentencing was a clear reflection of the brutal nature of the crime and the overwhelming evidence against her. It was also a stark reminder of the complexities of the justice system, where mental health issues and other factors sometimes clash with the severity of the crime committed. For Colleen Slemmer's family, the trial and conviction of Christa Pike was a bitter victory, a chance for justice, but one that could never bring their daughter back. After her conviction, Christa Pike's legal team filed multiple appeals over the years, challenging both the sentence and her guilt. However, despite these efforts, her conviction stood firm. In 2001, she even attempted to drop her appeals, stating that she wanted to be executed. Yet by 2002, she changed her mind and sought to reinstate her appeals, demonstrating the ongoing turmoil within her mind regarding her fate. Each appeal was ultimately denied, and Christa remained on Tennessee's death row, the only woman in the state to be given such a sentence. The case of Christa Pike continues to be a controversial one, both for the brutal nature of the crime and for the legal questions it raised. Some believed that the death penalty was too harsh, given Christa's age and troubled background, while others argued that her actions were so heinous that no punishment could be too severe. And regardless of where one stands on the issue, Christa Pike's trial and conviction left a lasting impact on Tennessee and the broader criminal justice system. Despite her new privileges, Christa's life on death row was far from ordinary. In 2001, Christa made headlines again when she was involved in a violent altercation with a fellow inmate, Patricia Jones. Pike, allegedly with the help of another inmate, attempted to strangle Jones with a shoestring, nearly succeeding in the attack. Christa was convicted of attempted first-degree murder, and her already lengthy sentence was extended by 25 years. This violent outburst only further solidified the public's perception of Pike as a dangerous individual. As the years passed, however, there was a shift in the legal landscape regarding the execution of prisoners. The legal arguments surrounding the death penalty and its application, especially in cases involving younger individuals, began to gain momentum. Christa's attorneys argued that her sentence violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, particularly because she was 18 years old at the time of the murder. This issue gained additional attention in 2005 when the Supreme Court ruled in Roper v. Simmons that executing individuals under the age of 18 was unconstitutional. Christa's defense team argued that the same reasoning should be applied to individuals who were 18 at the time of their crime, given that their brains were still developing and their capacity for rehabilitation was greater than once thought. Despite these arguments, the state of Tennessee refused to reconsider its position. In September 2025, the Tennessee Supreme Court issued a death warrant for Christa Pike, scheduling her execution for exactly 1 year later, on September 30th, 2026. The date would make history, as Christa would become the first woman executed in Tennessee in over 200 years. In the months leading up to the execution date, a public outcry erupted, with some people pushing for her execution to be carried out while others called for mercy, citing her age and mental health struggles. The case gained national attention once again, especially as the public debate over the death penalty and the treatment of women on death row continued to evolve. A petition called Tennesseans for an Alternative to the Death Penalty garnered over 2,500 signatures in an attempt to stop the execution. However, the victim's mother, May Martinez, publicly supported the execution, stating that the piece of her daughter's skull that was taken by Christa remained in state custody. Martinez spoke about how she could not have peace while that fragment of her daughter's remains was still in the possession of the state, symbolizing the pain and trauma that Colleen's death had caused her family. In the wake of Christa Pike's conviction, legal scholars and activists began to question the fairness of sentencing young people to death, particularly in cases involving severe mental illness or trauma. Some believed that the justice system had failed to fully account for Christa's troubled background, while others saw her as an example of the danger posed by individuals who commit crimes without a full understanding of the consequences. Regardless of the ongoing debate, Christa's fate seemed all but sealed. Her final years on death row were filled with legal battles, public outcry, and a growing awareness of the complexities of the case. For Colleen Slemmer's family, the pain of losing their daughter remained, as the emotional scars of that brutal night were still very much alive. Christa's execution, if carried out, would not bring Colleen back or heal the wounds that had been inflicted. It would only serve as a reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked violence, jealousy, and mental instability. For Tennessee, Christa Pike's case would forever remain a symbol of the complexities surrounding the death penalty, the treatment of women on death row, and the ongoing debate over the justice system's handling of young offenders. Whether or not her execution is carried out, the memory of Colleen Slemmer and the violence that ended her life will continue to haunt the state for years to come. Now that you've heard about the shocking case of Christa Pike and the brutal murder of Colleen Slemmer, what do you think? Was justice served with Pike's death sentence? Or is there a deeper question about youth, mental health, and the death penalty that we need to address? Do you believe a crime committed by someone as young as 18 should result in the death penalty? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Dark Justice Files to stay updated on cases like this one. Cases that reveal the dark truths behind shocking crimes and give us a deeper understanding of the justice system. Where are you watching from today? Whether you're from Tennessee or across the globe, we'd love to hear from you. True crime fans from all corners of the world unite here. And we want to know what you think about these complex legal and emotional questions. Is there ever a clear answer to justice? Or does each case challenge the very foundation of our beliefs? This case doesn't just end with Christa Pike's fate. There's so much more to uncover about the psychological complexities behind acts like these. Join us next week as we explore another heart-wrenching story that will leave you questioning the lengths people will go to in the name of jealousy and revenge. The case of Christa Pike and Colleen Slemmer is one that will not easily be forgotten. It raises difficult questions about the justice system, the consequences of unchecked jealousy, and the complexities of young offenders. Christa's brutal actions, Colleen's tragic death, and the emotional toll on everyone involved serve as a chilling reminder of how far someone can be pushed by their own demons. No matter where you stand on the issues, one thing is clear. This case forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the choices that define our lives. As the state of Tennessee faces the possibility of carrying out Christa Pike's execution, we're left to wonder, will this be the closure Colleen's family needs? Or will it leave even more unanswered questions in its wake? Thank you for watching. Remember, these cases don't just belong in the past. They affect all of us. Stay tuned for more stories that dig deep into the heart of justice, morality, and what it means to seek redemption.